Have you ever said something to your child, something you've said dozens of times before, and noticed, just for a second, something change in their eyes? Maybe they went quiet. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they just nodded, smiled, and pulled away a little. You didn't mean to hurt them. You never do. You were raised a certain way. You did your best with what you had. And yet, something feels off between you and your kids, and you can't quite put your finger on why. After more than 40 years working as a family psychologist, I can tell you with certainty, it's rarely the big dramatic moments that damage the parent-child bond. It's the small, everyday phrases, the ones we say without thinking, that quietly build walls between us and the people we love most. Today I'm going to share 7 of those phrases with you. Not to make you feel guilty, not to judge you, but because the parents I've seen heal their relationships the fastest are always the ones who were willing to look honestly at the words they were using. And here's what I need you to hear before we go any further. You are not a bad parent for saying these things. You may have heard them growing up. They may have felt normal, even loving, when you said them. But today, I'm going to show you exactly why they land differently than you intend, and I'll give you a simple, specific replacement for every single one. Stay with me through phrase number 3. In my 40 years of practice, it's the one I hear most often from adult children sitting in my office. And it might surprise you. When our children are young, we hold all the power. We feed them, protect them, guide them. The relationship feels clear, but something shifts as they grow up. They become adults with their own opinions, their own families, their own lives, and suddenly we're not sure how to talk to them anymore. We fall back on the same phrases we've always used, the ones that felt natural, even loving, not realizing that those same phrases hit differently now that our children are 30, 40, or 50 years old. According to research from the American Psychological Association, the quality of communication between parents and adult children is one of the strongest predictors of whether those relationships stay close or drift apart. It's not about how much you love each other. It's about how that love is expressed, or accidentally hidden, in the words you choose every day. I want to be clear about something before we begin. This is not a blame session. Every parent I've ever worked with, every single one, was doing the best they could with the tools they had. But sometimes the tools need updating. And that's exactly what we're doing today. For each of the 7 phrases, I'm going to tell you why it hurts, what your child actually hears when you say it, and what to say instead. Simple, practical, and something you can start using today. Phrase number 1. After everything I've done for you. Let me paint a picture for you. Your daughter calls on a Sunday afternoon. You've been hoping she'd visit more often. When you gently bring it up, the words that come out are, "After everything I've done for you, you can't even make time to come see me." You meant it as an expression of hurt, of longing, of love even. But here's what your daughter heard. "My love for you comes with a price tag, and you haven't paid it." This phrase, and all its variations, activates what psychologists call chronic guilt. It's a heavy, ongoing sense that no matter what your child does, it will never be enough. And here's the painful irony. The children who grow up hearing this most often don't become more attentive. They become more avoidant. They pull away, not because they don't love you, but because being around you starts to feel like standing in front of a debt collector. I once worked with a man in his late 50s who hadn't called his mother in over a year. When I asked him why, he said, "Every conversation ends with me feeling like a failure. I just don't have the energy for it anymore." His mother thought she was expressing love. He experienced it as punishment. The deeper wound here is this. When a child hears that love is conditional, that it must be earned through visits, calls, or sacrifices, they stop believing they are loved for who they are. That's a wound that doesn't heal easily. What to say instead? "I miss you. I'd really love to spend more time together. Can we find a day that works for both of us?" That's it. No ledger. No debt. Just honest, clean love. Phrase number 2. Why can't you be more like your brother, or sister, or cousin, or the neighbor's kid? Comparison is one of the oldest parenting tools in the book. and it is one of the most damaging. When you compare your child unfavorably to a sibling, even with the best intentions, even if you're just trying to motivate them, you are sending a message that goes straight to the core of who they are as a person. You are not enough. Someone else is better. I wish you were different. Psychologists call this an identity wound. It forms early, often in childhood, but it doesn't stay there. I've sat with men and women in their 40s and 50s who still carry the sting of being told, over and over again, that their sibling was smarter, more responsible, more successful, more grateful. And here's something most parents don't expect. This phrase doesn't just hurt the child being compared. It poisons the relationship between the siblings too. The one being held up as the example often feels uncomfortable and guilty. The one being compared down feels resentment toward the sibling and toward you. I worked with a woman once, in her mid-40s, who described her relationship with her sister as polite but empty. When we dug into the history, almost every tension traced back to the constant comparisons their mother had made throughout their childhood and teenage years. The mother never understood why her daughters weren't close. The answer was sitting right there in 1,000 small sentences she'd long forgotten. What to say instead? I can see this is hard for you. Let's talk about what's getting in the way and figure it out together. Every child needs to feel like they are seen and valued for exactly who they are, not measured against someone else. Phrase number 3. I'm fine, don't worry about me. I told you this one might surprise you. This is the phrase that, on the surface, seems almost noble. You don't want to burden your children. You don't want to be a bother. You've always been the strong one. And so when your son calls and asks how you're doing, you say, "Oh, I'm fine, don't worry about me." And just like that, you've closed the door. Here's what your child hears on the other side of that sentence. I don't trust you with my real feelings. You're not allowed in. Over time, when a parent consistently deflects genuine concern with "I'm fine," especially as they get older, the adult child learns to stop asking. Not because they don't care. Because they've been trained to believe you don't want them to. The emotional distance grows. The conversations stay shallow. And the parent, the very same one who wanted connection, wonders why their kids never really talk to them anymore. There's also something else worth naming. Many parents over 60 were raised in a generation where self-sufficiency was a virtue and expressing vulnerability was seen as weakness. That was the culture. But your adult children live in a different emotional world. To them, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's an invitation. It's how they know you trust them. It's how real closeness happens. I had a patient, a retired Navy officer, tough as they come, 74 years old, who came to me because he felt completely isolated from his 3 adult children. He loved them deeply. He couldn't understand why they felt so far away. In our very first session, I asked him, when was the last time one of your children knew you were struggling with something? He thought for a long time. Then he said quietly, never. That was the beginning of everything changing for him. What to say instead? Actually, I've been a little lonely lately. I'd really love to talk if you have a few minutes. That sentence takes courage. But it opens a door that "I'm fine" quietly keeps locked. Phrase number 4. That's not how we raised you. Your son tells you he's raising his kids differently than you raised him. Your daughter makes a decision about her career, her marriage, or her lifestyle that doesn't line up with your values. And without even thinking, you say it. That's not how we raised you. This phrase is particularly painful because it doesn't just criticize a choice. It calls into question your child's entire identity and development. What they hear is, you are a disappointment. You have failed to become what I intended. And here's the problem. Your child is not 14 anymore. They are a full-grown adult who has spent decades building a life, a set of values, and a sense of self. When you dismiss their choices with this phrase, you are essentially telling them that none of that growth matters. That your original vision of who they should be is more valid than the person they've actually become. It also triggers a very specific kind of defensiveness. Because now your child isn't just defending a decision, they're defending themselves. And that's a fight that never ends well. I want to be clear. You don't have to agree with your children's choices. It is okay, it is completely natural, to feel confused or even sad when your child lives differently than you hoped. But there is a profound difference between expressing your feelings honestly and invalidating their entire personhood. What to say instead? Help me understand why this is important to you. I want to hear where you're coming from. That sentence doesn't require you to agree. It just requires you to listen. And that, more than anything, is what your child is asking for. Phrase number 5. You'll understand when you're older. This one might feel harmless, even wise. After all, you have lived longer. You have seen more. There are things that genuinely do become clearer with age. But when you say this to an adult child, someone who is 35, 45, or 50 years old, you are not offering wisdom. You are shutting down the conversation. What your child hears is, your perspective doesn't matter. Your intelligence and experience are still insufficient. I am not interested in what you think. This is especially painful because many adult children are already navigating complex lives, managing careers, raising their own children, facing their own struggles, and they come to you for genuine dialogue. Not to be patted on the head and told to wait another 20 years. I've worked with adult children who describe this phrase as the single biggest reason they stopped sharing things with their parents. "Why would I tell her anything?" one woman said, "when I know the answer is always going to be, you'll understand someday. It makes me feel like a child, like my whole life experience counts for nothing." The world your adult children live in is also genuinely different from the one you grew up in. On some things, they understand things you don't. Great relationships between parents and adult children are built on mutual respect, not a one-way flow of wisdom downward. What to say instead? I see this differently than you do, and I'd really like to understand your perspective first. Will you tell me more about how you're thinking about this? That sentence keeps the conversation open. It treats your child as an equal. And it models the kind of respect you'd like to receive in return. Phrase number 6. We sacrificed everything for you. Of all 7 phrases, this one carries the heaviest emotional weight. Because it is almost always true, and still deeply harmful. You did sacrifice. Many of you worked jobs you didn't love to pay for schools and clothes and opportunities. You gave up sleep, hobbies, dreams. You put your children first for decades. That is real. That is honorable. And none of that should be minimized. But when sacrifice becomes a spoken debt, when it becomes a phrase used in the middle of a disagreement or a way of justifying why your child should behave a certain way, it transforms love into a burden. What your child hears is not, "I love you so much." What they hear is, "You owe me, and you can never fully repay it." I have worked with adult children in their 40s and 50s who are still emotionally exhausted from carrying this weight. They describe it as a kind of invisible mortgage on their lives, a debt they feel they can never fully pay off. Some of them become over-compliant, dropping everything whenever a parent calls, not out of love, but out of guilt. Others pull away entirely because the emotional cost of being around their parents has simply become too high. The most painful part? Many of their parents, people just like you, have no idea the impact those words have had. They said it in passing, in a moment of frustration. They didn't realize it would echo for 20 years. What to say instead? Raising you was the greatest privilege of my life. I didn't sacrifice. I invested. And you were worth every bit of it. Say that instead. Mean it. Watch what happens. Phrase number 7. I guess I'm just a bad parent then. This one is subtle. And it might be the most psychologically complex of all 7. When a conversation gets hard, when your child expresses hurt or frustration, some parents respond with this phrase. "Fine, I guess I'm just a terrible parent. I guess I never did anything right." It feels like self-deprecation. It might even feel honest in the moment. But what it actually does is immediately shift the emotional burden of the conversation from parent to child. Suddenly, your child is no longer expressing their own pain. They are managing yours. They have to stop what they were saying and reassure you, comfort you, tell you that isn't what they meant. And the original issue, the thing they actually needed to talk about, gets buried. Psychologists call this emotional role reversal, and it happens more often than most people realize. The parent becomes the one who needs comforting. The child becomes the caretaker. And the child learns, very quickly, that bringing up difficult feelings leads not to resolution, but to a new crisis, one they are expected to clean up. Over time, children in this pattern simply stop raising difficult topics. They go quiet. They smile and say everything is fine. And the parent wonders why they never really talk anymore. This phrase is almost never intentionally manipulative. Most parents who use it are genuinely in pain. They feel accused, misunderstood, overwhelmed. But the impact is the same regardless of the intent. What to say instead? I know I've made mistakes, and I'm genuinely sorry for the ones that hurt you. I want to do better. Can we keep talking about this? That sentence stays in the conversation. It doesn't exit through the back door of self-pity. And it gives your child the thing they have always needed, a parent who can handle hard truths. I want to stop here and say something directly to you. If you recognized yourself in any of those 7 phrases, if you're sitting there feeling a knot in your stomach, I need you to hear this. That feeling is a good sign. It means you care. It means you're paying attention. And in my 40 years of working with families, I can tell you that the parents who were willing to look honestly at their own patterns were always the ones who rebuilt the deepest connections with their children. The brain is remarkable at any age. Neuroscience has shown us again and again that we are never too old to learn new patterns, develop new habits, and experience genuine emotional change. The science calls it neuroplasticity. I call it hope. I want to share one story with you. I worked with a woman, I'll call her Margaret, who was 72 years old when she first came to see me. She hadn't had a real conversation with her daughter in 15 years. Not an argument, not a falling out. Just a slow, steady drift into polite, surface-level phone calls twice a year. She had nearly given up. Over the course of about 8 months, Margaret did something very simple. She stopped using the phrases I've shared with you today. She started asking questions instead of making statements. She started saying, "I miss you," instead of "you never call." She started letting her daughter see when she was struggling, instead of insisting she was fine. One afternoon, her daughter called, unexpectedly, in the middle of the week, just to talk. No occasion. No reason. Just to talk. Margaret told me later that she sat in her kitchen and cried for 20 minutes after they hung up. 15 years of distance. 8 months of different words. Your children don't need a perfect parent. They never did. They need a present one. One who is willing to keep showing up, keep trying, and keep choosing connection over pride. Let's do a quick review of the 7 phrases we covered today, and the simple replacements that can change everything. When you're tempted to say, "After everything I've done for you," try instead, "I miss you. Can we find time to be together?" When you're tempted to compare your child to a sibling, try instead, "I see you're struggling. Let's figure this out together." When you're tempted to say, "I'm fine, don't worry about me," try instead, "Actually, I'd love to talk. Do you have a few minutes?" When you want to say, "That's not how we raised you," try instead, "Help me understand where you're coming from." When you feel like saying, "You'll understand when you're older," try instead, "I see this differently. Tell me more about how you're thinking about it." When "we sacrificed everything for you" is on the tip of your tongue, replace it with "raising you was the greatest privilege of my life." And when you feel like saying, "I guess I'm just a bad parent then," say instead, "I know I've made mistakes. I want to do better. Can we keep talking?" Here's your challenge for this week. Pick just one, the phrase you recognized most in yourself. Write down the replacement. Put it somewhere you'll see it. Practice it out loud if you need to. Because the way we talk to the people we love most is a skill. And like any skill, it gets better with practice. Before we close, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Which of these 7 phrases hit closest to home? You don't have to have all the answers. Just being honest in the comments is a powerful first step. And if this video made you think of someone, a friend, a sibling, someone you know who is struggling with their relationship with their adult children, please share it with them. It might be the most meaningful thing you send them this week. You watch this entire video. That tells me something about who you are. You're not someone who is satisfied with distance. You're not someone who has given up. You are someone who still believes it is possible to be closer to the people you love. And you are right. The strongest thing you can do at this stage of life is love well. Not perfectly. Not without mistakes. But with honesty, with humility, and with a willingness to keep trying. That is what strong elderly life is all about. Every week, we bring you conversations rooted in real psychology, real experience, and real respect for the life you have lived and the life you still have ahead of you. If this video helped you, please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new episode. And next week, we're going to talk about something just as important: the 5 signs that your adult child has forgiven you, even if they've never said it out loud. You won't want to miss that one. Until then, take care of yourself. And take care of the people who matter most to you.